The auctioneer's voice was a cruel, relentless hammer, pounding against the fragile walls of Ilara's composure. She stood on the rough-hewn platform, the dry dust of the Texas plains clinging to her worn dress, every gaze a fresh brand on her skin. 19 years. Just 19, and her father had sold her like cattle, traded her freedom for a debt he couldn't face. Despair was a cold, constant companion. A heavy stone settled in her chest. She averted her eyes from the crowd, from the greedy, assessing stares, focusing instead on the splintered wood beneath her bare feet. Shame coiled in her gut, a familiar, burning sensation. She wasn't merely being bought. She was being stripped bare, her very person reduced to a price. Then a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the din. $60. The crowd murmured. $60. It was a meager sum, a testament to her perceived worth. Ilara kept her eyes down, bracing herself for the usual transaction. The coarse hand, the forced march. But then, a shadow fell over her, a man's boots filling her limited view. They were sturdy, caked with the red earth of the ranchlands. He didn't reach for her. Instead, a quiet question, almost a whisper, reached her ears, surprising in its gentleness. "Ma'am, with your permission, would you come with me?" Ilara's head snapped up. Silas, the white rancher, his face weathered by sun and wind, eyes a surprising shade of blue that held a depth she couldn't fathom. His expression was solemn, not predatory. The question hung in the air, a shocking anomaly in the brutal ritual. Permission? Her throat felt tight, unused to such a concept. This was not how it worked. Yet, the choice, however small, was offered. It was a strange hook, reeling her in with its unexpected kindness. She nodded, a tiny, hesitant motion. Before sundown, under a sky bleeding shades of orange and purple, they stood before a circuit preacher. The words were a blur, a strange pronouncement over two strangers. He didn't touch her, didn't force her hand. The ring, simple and plain, felt foreign on her finger. Was this safety, or a new kind of burden? Her mind reeled with the impossible shift. One moment, property; the next, a wife. The very word felt like a lie, a cruel joke. She did not look back at the life she had just abandoned. This new beginning was a raw, aching uncertainty. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The journey to the ranch was quiet, punctuated only by the rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels and the distant call of a hawk. Ilara sat hunched on the hard seat, her shoulders stiff, every muscle tensed. Silas drove, his gaze fixed on the horizon, his profile stoic. He offered no conversation, no explanation for the bewildering turn of events. His silence was not menacing, but it was impenetrable, leaving Ilara to wrestle with her own churning thoughts. The sun dipped below the rugged hills, casting long, skeletal shadows across the land. This was her new home, a place of stark, unforgiving beauty. The ranch house was a modest structure, built of rough-hewn timber, sturdy but unadorned. It smelled of dust and old wood, of quiet solitude. He showed her to a small room, clean and simple, with a narrow bed and a single window looking out onto the vast, darkening plains. "This will be yours," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. There was no warmth, no welcome, just a statement of fact. Ilara nodded, her own voice caught in her throat. She felt like a guest, a temporary resident, despite the ring on her finger. The truth was, she had never truly belonged anywhere. Her father's face flashed in her mind, his pinched lips, the hard glint in his eyes when he spoke of the money, the relief he couldn't hide when she was gone. He had seen her as a burden, a mouth to feed, a problem to dispose of. That familiar ache of being unwanted returned, sharp and keen. She traced the simple band of gold on her finger, trying to reconcile the act of being bought with the strange, unasked-for politeness of Silas. He was an enigma, a man who broke the rules of possession in the very act of acquiring. It made no sense. She lay on the narrow bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through dry grass. Sleep was a distant concept. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced, churning with questions and anxieties. Was this kindness, or a new, more subtle form of entrapment? Her scars, both visible and invisible, throbbed with a phantom pain. She remembered the lash of her father's belt, the sting of hunger, the constant threat of eviction. Silas had offered her shelter, a roof over her head, but at what cost? She was his wife, by law, but nothing else felt real. The air in the room is thick with unspoken truths. She knew nothing of him, and he, she suspected, knew even less of her. Days bled into weeks, each one a slow unraveling of Alara's rigid expectations. Silas was a man of routines, rising with the sun, working the land with a quiet, tireless dedication. He spoke little, his instructions clear and concise, mostly regarding the chores she was expected to do. She cleaned the small house, prepared meals, and tended to the small garden. Her hands, once raw from different labors, found a new rhythm with these tasks. She watched him from the kitchen window as he rode out to check the fences, his silhouette stark against the vast sky. He was not cruel, not loud, not demanding. He was simply there. This unexpected lack of brutality slowly chipped away at Alara's hardened defenses. She waited for the shoe to drop, for the mask to slip, for the true nature of her new master to emerge. But it never did. He ate his meals across from her, his gaze steady, his movements economical. Sometimes, their eyes would meet across the table, and in those fleeting moments, Alara felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. Not curiosity, perhaps, but a shared silence, a mutual acknowledgement of their strange predicament. He did not pry into her past, nor did he offer details of his own. The silence between them was thick, yet it began to feel less like a barrier, and more like a quiet, empty space waiting to be filled. She found herself observing the small things, the way he carefully mended a broken bridle, the gentle patience he showed a skittish calf, the quiet satisfaction in his eyes when a storm cleared and the fields were watered. These weren't the actions of a man who saw humans as mere chattel. Was this kindness? The word felt dangerous, like a trap. Kindness had always been conditional, a prelude to greater pain. Yet, he seemed to expect nothing in return for the basic provisions he offered, save for her help with the household. The loneliness of her past life, the constant fight for survival, had etched deep lines within her. She had always yearned for a place, a sense of belonging that stretched beyond the next day's meal. Here, on this isolated ranch, surrounded by the quiet expanse of nature, the yearning felt sharper. She was tethered, yes, but not by chains. The invisible bonds that held her were made of something intangible, something akin to routine, and the slow, steady hum of two lives existing in parallel. She still didn't trust him fully, not with the deep, scarred parts of herself, but a tentative connection, fragile as a spider's silk, was beginning to form. The quiet solitude of the ranch proved to be a fragile shield against the wider world. News traveled fast in the small town, whispers carried on the wind. It wasn't long before their peculiar arrangement became the subject of fervent gossip. Alara felt the stares, the lingering glances, during their infrequent trips to town for supplies. Women huddled together, their eyes darting from her to Silas, their expressions a mix of condemnation and morbid fascination. The judgment was a tangible thing, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. She heard snatches of conversations. Bought her, a Negro girl. Married her that same day, can you imagine? Shame, a familiar burn, rekindled in her cheeks. She was an outsider, doubly so now. Her skin color had always marked her, but now her very existence, her unconventional union, made her an anomaly, a breach in their perceived order. It wasn't just the fact of Silas buying her. It was the audacity of marrying her. This was the South, not long after the war, and such unions were not only rare but often met with visceral disapproval. The weight of community judgment was a constant, subtle pressure. She felt herself shrinking, wanting to disappear into the vast landscape, to escape the eyes that seemed to strip her bare and judge her worth. Silas, surprisingly, seemed impervious to their stares. He moved through town with the same quiet dignity he carried on the ranch. When a shopkeeper spoke to him with a thinly veiled sneer, Silas merely nodded, his gaze unwavering, his hand resting almost imperceptibly on the small of Alara's back. It was a gesture so subtle, so unexpected, that it sent a jolt through her, a silent defiance. He wasn't defending himself. He was simply stating their presence, their unity, without a single word. He simply existed, and by his side, so did she. That night, back on the ranch, the silence between them was different. It held a new weight, a shared understanding. "They talk," she ventured, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his blue eyes calm. "Let them," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Their words don't change what is here." His simple declaration pierced through some of the shame. It was a shared burden, yes, but also a shared defiance. For the first time, Ilara felt a tiny, fragile tendril of hope unfurl within her. She was taking an emotional risk, placing a sliver of her bruised trust in this silent man. Perhaps, just perhaps, this might not be another cage. The ranch began to take on a different shape in Ilara's mind, transforming from a place of transient occupation to something resembling a home. A grizzled ranch hand, old Jedediah, shuffled into their lives, hired by Silas to help with the growing herd. Jedediah, with his kindly, weathered face and endless stories, brought a new dimension to their quiet household. He treated Ilara with a simple respect, never questioning her presence, always offering a gruff, paternal word of encouragement. He seemed to sense the deep-seated weariness in her, and his steady presence was like a warm blanket. Ilara found purpose in the work, beyond mere survival. She helped Jedediah with the smaller calves, learning the language of the animals, the rhythms of the land. She found a strange satisfaction in the demanding physicality of it, the way her muscles ached at the end of the day, a welcome counterpoint to the constant ache in her spirit. Silas observed her, sometimes offering a rare word of praise for a job well done. "You got a good hand with them," he'd say, and the quiet affirmation felt like a small victory. She wasn't just a burden here, she was a contributor, a necessary part of the ranch's pulse. One evening, during a particularly fierce dust storm, they huddled together in the kitchen, the wind howling outside like a hungry beast. Silas, usually so guarded, spoke of his own past. His parents had passed years ago, leaving him the struggling ranch, a legacy heavy with expectation. He spoke of the isolation, the relentless toil, the quiet despair of facing it alone. His voice was low, tinged with a loneliness that Ilara recognized intimately. "Sometimes," he confessed, looking into the dancing flames of the hearth, "the quiet can be louder than any shout." In that moment, Ilara saw beyond the stoic rancher, saw the man beneath, burdened by his own sorrows, his own scars. He wasn't just a buyer. He was a man seeking his own form of solace, perhaps even his own kind of belonging. The thought resonated deeply within her. Her own yearning for a place, a family, mirrored his. The wife she had become was not just a legal status, but a shared responsibility, a fragile partnership forged in loneliness and unexpected need. The word belonging no longer felt alien. It was a seed, slowly germinating in the parched earth of her heart, watered by shared silence and quiet understanding. The brief respite of growing comfort was shattered by the gathering clouds of winter, both literal and figurative. A brutal cold front swept in from the north, an early biting storm that promised a harsh, unforgiving season. The cattle grew restless, their breath misting in the frigid air. The ranch, already strained by recent lean years, faced a dire threat. Feed was dwindling, and the deep snowdrifts made it impossible to reach distant pastures. Silas spent long, arduous hours tending to the herd, his face grim, his exhaustion visible in the deeper lines around his eyes. But the cold wasn't the only threat. The whispers from town had not died down. They had merely frozen, waiting for an opportune moment to resurface. The escalating hardship seemed to fuel the community's prejudice. Rumors began to circulate, darker and more insidious than before. Stories of lost livestock, of unexplained illness, started to attach themselves to Ilara's presence. The church lady, Mrs. Albright, with her tight bun and sharper-than-nails gaze, began openly eyeing Ilara with suspicion, speaking in hushed tones about unnatural unions and God's judgment for such transgressions. One blustery afternoon, the local sheriff, a stern man named Brody known for his rigid adherence to the law, rode out to the ranch. His face was a mask of official concern, but his eyes held a cold, assessing glint when they landed on Ilara. He spoke of reports, of concerns for the welfare of the community. He didn't accuse directly, But his questions, polite yet probing, cast a long shadow of doubt. He asked about the health of the cattle, about the finances of the ranch, about Silas's unusual marriage. Every query felt like a veiled accusation against Ilara, as if her very existence on the ranch was the root cause of their troubles. Ilara felt the familiar chill of public shaming, the sickening sensation of being falsely accused. Her desperation, her former vulnerability, was being twisted into something sinister, mistaken for weakness that invited trouble. She stood silently beside Silas, her hands clasped tightly, fighting the urge to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of suspicion. The external threat of the storm and the internal threat of prejudice converged, creating a crucible of tension. Their fragile, nascent world on the ranch, the belonging they had so carefully cultivated, felt suddenly vulnerable, threatened by forces far beyond their control. This isolated peace could easily be ruined. The sheriff's visit left a cold, unsettling residue. The winter storm intensified, trapping them on the ranch for days, making the outside world feel distant and hostile. Silas worked ceaselessly, pushing himself to the brink, trying to keep the cattle from freezing, his face etched with worry. The unspoken fear hung heavy in the air. If they lost too many cattle, the ranch, their fragile sanctuary, would be ruined. The banker in town, already wary of Silas's finances, might finally call in the loans. Their safety, their quiet existence, teetered on a precipice. During one bitter night, with the wind howling like a pack of wolves, Silas came in, his hands numb, his shoulders stooped. Ilara made him hot coffee, her hands trembling as she poured. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the weight of his burden seemed to momentarily lift. Jedediah says some folk are talking about taking measures, he confessed, his voice low. About how I brought trouble to the county. The implication was clear. They were talking about her. Ilara felt a sudden, fierce urge to protect him, to protect the quiet life they had built. But then, a cold voice of doubt whispered in her mind. Was this not a variation of her old life? Where she was still the cause of trouble? Still the one to be disposed of? Had she merely traded one kind of burden for another? The choice to stay felt heavier now, fraught with deeper meaning. She could try to leave, disappear into the vast, indifferent landscape, sparing Silas further trouble. The path to freedom, albeit a lonely one, still lay open. But as she looked at Silas, at the exhaustion in his eyes, at the quiet strength that still held him upright, she knew she couldn't. He had offered her choice when no one else had. He had given her a sense of purpose. He hadn't demanded, he had asked. And now, in their shared vulnerability, she saw the true cost of that first, strange offer. Her loyalty, once a hollow concept, solidified into something real, something she chose to give. I'll stay, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Whatever comes, we face it. It wasn't a heroic declaration, but a quiet, deeply personal affirmation of allegiance. The threat had tested them, and in the shadow of ruin, their bond had deepened. The storm eventually broke, leaving behind a stark, frozen landscape, but also a profound stillness. They had lost some cattle, enough to sting, but not enough to break them. The immediate crisis passed, leaving scars on the land and on their spirits, yet it had also forged a deeper, unspoken bond between them. Silas and Ilara moved through the days with a new kind of rhythm, an understanding that transcended words. He trusted her judgment with the remaining herd, and she, in turn, trusted his quiet resolve. One afternoon, as the first fragile signs of spring began to emerge from the thawing earth, Ilara found Silas in the barn, mending a broken fence post. He looked up, his movements slow, deliberate. His hands were calloused, his knuckles thick, but they moved with a gentle precision. He didn't speak, but his eyes met hers, and in that shared glance, a world of meaning passed between them. It was an acknowledgement of their struggle, a silent affirmation of their survival. Together, there was no need for grand pronouncements. The quiet strength radiating from him was enough. Ilara realized, with a startling clarity, that she was no longer merely surviving. She was living. The constant, gnawing ache of being unwanted had begun to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of belonging. The shame that had clung to her like a second skin had started to slough away, replaced by a quiet dignity she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at her own hands, scarred from years of hardship, but now capable, strong, and useful. She was not broken. The realization was a quiet, internal triumph, a profound healing that began not with external validation, but with the quiet act of choosing to stay, of choosing to contribute. The town's judgment, while not entirely gone, had softened into a resigned indifference. Mrs. Albright still gave them icy stares, but the sheriff hadn't returned. The community, facing their own struggles with the harsh winter, seemed to have less energy for their peculiar union. It was a cold peace, perhaps, but a peace nonetheless. Elara understood that their acceptance would never be complete, but it no longer mattered as much. What mattered was the quiet world they had built, protected by the sturdy walls of their shared loyalty and the unspoken truth that they had found each other, not by convention, but by choice. With the advent of spring, life on the ranch settled into a new, hopeful rhythm. The remaining cattle grew fat on the emerging grasses, and the future, though still uncertain, felt less precarious. Elara planted new seeds in her garden, a small act of faith in the coming season. The earth, once barren and frozen, now yielded to her touch, promising sustenance and beauty. She and Silas worked side by side, their movements synchronized, a quiet, effective partnership. The vast plains around them stretched endlessly, but their world, contained within the fence lines of the ranch, felt whole. They spoke more now, not of grand dreams, but of the practicalities of ranch life, of small observations, of the quiet beauty of a sunrise. Sometimes, their conversations would drift to their pasts, fragments offered tentatively, then met with understanding rather than judgment. Silas spoke of his family's struggles, the burden of maintaining the land, the years of solitary toil. Elara, in turn, spoke of her mother, of the brief, fleeting moments of tenderness before the shadows fell. The scars of their pasts were still there, etched deeply within them, but they no longer defined their present. They were reminders of resilience, of battles fought and survived, not open wounds. The simple ring on Elara's finger, once a symbol of her peculiar enslavement, now felt different. It was a tangible mark of the choice she had made, a quiet testament to the belonging she had found. It was a symbol of her willingness to stay, to build, to love. They had not married for love in the conventional sense, but love had grown, slowly and steadily, like a sturdy oak in the wind-swept plains. It was a love rooted in shared hardship, quiet respect, and the profound realization that they were better, stronger, together. A future began to form in Elara's mind, a picture not of grand wealth or societal acceptance, but of quiet continuation. Perhaps children, their own children, running free on the ranch, knowing a safety and belonging Elara had never known. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, a new emotional risk. This was not a heroic triumph, but a quiet win, a life chosen, built brick by brick, moment by moment. It was a testament to the idea that true freedom was not merely the absence of chains, but the power to choose one's own path, to choose one's own family, even from the most unlikely of beginnings. The story of Elara and Silas was not one for the town gossips, nor for the grand halls of society. It was a story told in the quiet creak of the porch swing at dusk, in the shared warmth of a hearth fire on a cold night, in the deep, knowing glances exchanged across a dinner table. It was the enduring narrative of two souls, scarred by different burdens, who had found an improbable sanctuary in each other. Their beginning, born of desperation and an unconventional transaction, had blossomed into something profoundly real, something resilient. Silas, the quiet rancher, had offered more than a home. He had offered choice when Elara had none, respect when she knew only disdain, and a quiet, unwavering presence that had allowed her to finally shed the heavy cloak of shame. Elara, the labor girl bought at auction, had brought more than her hands to the ranch. She had brought a strength forged in hardship, a fierce loyalty, and a capacity for love that had healed not just her own spirit, but parts of his as well. They were not defined by the circumstances of their meeting, but by the steady, intentional choices they made, each day, to stay, to build, to be. The scars remained, physical and emotional, but they were no longer sources of pain. They were maps of a journey, proof of endurance, and quiet reminders of how far they had come. The vast open skies above the ranch bore witness to their peace, a peace hard-won and deeply cherished. It was not a peace that came from the absence of trouble, but from the unwavering presence of each other. The haunting melody of Alara's past still played sometimes, a faint echo, but it was now accompanied by the hopeful harmony of her present. Their love, unconventional and quietly powerful, was a testament to the transformative power of kindness and the profound human need for belonging. They had built a family, not of blood, but of shared spirit and unbreakable trust. In a world quick to judge and condemn, they had found affirmation in the unwavering loyalty they held for one another. Their story ended not with a flourish, but with the quiet, sustained hum of a life truly lived. A life built on solid ground, chosen freely, and loved deeply. It was a bittersweet resolution, knowing the cruelty they had overcome, but bathed in the warm, golden light of an enduring peace.